Hello and welcome back to another episode of the NXT Podcast. I'm your host, Skelly Bones, here on the No Holds Barred Network, bringing you reviews every Friday and previews of NXT every Tuesday. And with it being Tuesday the 8th, we bring you a preview of tomorrow's NXT live on the USA Network. But first, we're going to start with a breakdown of last week's NXT. A little review of the shakeups going on with Smackdown going to Fox, and some of the fallout from Hell in a Cell, just because that was such a shit show. And then we'll get into what's coming up tomorrow on NXT. So last week we had the first live episode going full 2 hours on USA, and it was definitely an episode to remember. Basically a takeover level quality match. You had all the championships on the line, with the exception of the North American title. You had a amazing opening NXT title match between Matt Riddle and Adam Cole. You had a great women's title match with Shayna Baszler and Candice LeRae, and you had a pretty good, albeit exceedingly long, tag title match with the Street Profits and the Undisputed Era. Overall, though, a very good show. Definitely worth watching, and it'll be interesting to see if they can keep this this level of hype and quality for their shows going forward. Also this week, you had Smackdown on Friday for the first time ever. Smackdown came to Fox, and this whole week sort of started the whole season premiere, they called it. So you have Raw on Monday, NXT on Wednesdays, and SmackDown on Fridays now. And it was an interesting show. It had a big show feel to it on Fox. I don't know if they filmed it differently or used a different style, but it definitely, I don't know, it felt bigger. And with The Rock being there, there's a lot of hype. That being said, the main event totally dragged me down. You have Kofi, who's been champ for 6 months, and in all fairness, I haven't been that big of a fan of his run. But I do like Kofi and think that he's a good worker. And to give this guy a 7-second squash where he's just immediately killed by Brock is like such a disservice to him as a worker and as an employee. It just, it was unnecessary. And then you had Cain Velasquez come out. Okay, that's fine. You had so much time with him, you couldn't have given Kofi an extra 2 minutes to at least, get a freaking Trouble in Paradise in and get it eaten by Brock or something. What a waste. And that pretty much disappointment leads right into the Hell in a Cell that happened on Sunday, which I honestly wasn't even planning on watching the whole thing, considering there was only 3 matches really announced until Sunday. And the only one I cared about was the main event, Seth Rollins and The Fiend, because you had a character who is actually semi-interesting now in The Fiend, and I felt like this was a position where, okay, you have to have this guy win. Like, Bray has to be the champion at this point. But again, WWE sometimes does what they do best and overthinks things, and overthinks the finish of a match, and decides to go with the DQ or the ref stoppage, whatever you want to say. Either way, it was ridiculous, and you could tell from the fan reaction at the end of that show exactly what they thought about that match. And hearing people chant for refunds and hearing people chant for AEW and just booing as loud as I've ever heard, I'm not going to dwell on the negative. And on that note, let me actually bring it to a positive note. AEW and the running of the first episode of AEW Dynamite on TNT. If we're going to go by the ratings war, they actually won this week, going head to head against NXT. They had I believe it was 1.4 million viewers for their debut episode, and it was a good episode. I already had my review up on the last report I did, where I watched them both back to back, and watching 2 hours, or actually 4 hours, excuse me, of wrestling after working my regular 9 to 5 is it's a bit much. So I'm glad I'm mainly sticking to NXT, but I will give you guys updates with some of the more important goings-ons and going-ons. I don't know, that sounds weird. But the more important storylines happening in AEW, at least. I'll definitely keep you guys updated with that. Anyways, AEW's first show was a standard show, in my opinion, where NXT went with a takeover style event for their heads-up debut. I actually initially was kind of upset, and then the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated the fact that they gave you a more or less standard episode of AEW Dynamite. They didn't hotshot anything. There was a bit much in the main event, in my opinion, with the interference and, refs just not caring and turning a 3-on-3 into a 3-on-2, and it's just whatever. But that's the least of my problems, especially with everything that happened Sunday night at Hell in a Cell. You had a good Sammy Guevara-Cody match. You had the interesting main event, like I said. And Hangman Page and Pac was technically not a bad match, but a bit boring, I guess, in my opinion. But overall, 2 good shows. So I'm really excited to see what happens this week when they go for the second time head-to-head. And you're not going to have quite the same level of, takeover type match for NXT. You're not going to have a pre-show kickoff. You're not going to have 30 minutes of no commercials for the first hour on this one either. So, I think this is going to be a better gauge of, let's see just a regular NXT versus a regular AEW, and we'll see how this one goes down. And that being said, we'll get into some of the matches that are going to be coming up on NXT this Wednesday. So this Wednesday, October 9th, 2019, we only have 2 matches that have been announced thus far. The Walter versus Kushida match and the Lio Rush versus Drew Gulak NXT Cruiserweight Championship match. And I just like to notice that they're calling it the NXT Cruiserweight Championship match now. And also considering they canceled 205 Live's taping after SmackDown on Friday, I don't know, leads me to believe that if they didn't do it this Friday, I doubt they're going to do it any coming Friday. And we may either see the finish of 205 Live and just the complete integration of cruiserweights into NXT, or maybe even 205 Live going back onto the network as like either the run into NXT, or maybe the networks on the network right after NXT. So that could be interesting to see what happens there. Walter versus Kushida should be a interesting match. You're going to have, the big man, small man clash, which sometimes can be good, sometimes can be bad, but you have 2 high quality workers going in there, and I think they're going to have a good match. Now, that being said, I actually don't think we're going to get a finish in this match. I'm like 90% sure we're going to end up with Imperium running in and doing some sort of BS finish or just causing interference or something like that. I feel like this feud is going to continue probably into a takeover. We do have the Chicago War Games coming up in November, and this could easily be a takeover quality match. So I wouldn't be surprised if this doesn't quite get the clean finish we're looking for. Now, last week we also had the return of both Finn Balor and Tommaso Ciampa. So let's see if that plays into any storylines this week. I'm almost certain we're going to see Finn. Whether or not we see Tommaso again, I'm not so certain. Like I said before, I do think he's not 100% yet. I think he may be able to do appearances and be on the mic, but I highly doubt that he should be in the ring yet. So Finn challenging Adam Cole, in my opinion, that's a great feud. That's a high caliber feud with a big star from the main roster coming back and former longest reigning NXT champion or whatever he was. These two guys I think can go and have a really good back and forth match together. They're very similar to Gargano and Cole, similar sized, and both with just great stamina. I really would like to see how that Finn and Cole feud can play out. Ciampa and Cole is the same way. It's there's no bad to this to either of these guys being challengers. And when you have the quality of workers that you have in NXT at the top level like this, your top 5, 6, 7 guys, I could all see as champs, and easily, you have you have a multitude of combinations for feuds that I think could be great and can be different and interesting. And then we also have a lot of guys on the mid card that I'm still excited to see. Cameron Grimes has been on a winning streak, though he didn't quite get the reaction he wanted the last time we saw him. I am excited to see his next match and what they do with him. We have Dominik Dijakovic and Keith Lee. Even though Keith Lee came out on top, I'm assuming both of these guys are going to get somewhat of a push coming up, so we'll see what they do with them. We also have the women's championship and who the number one contender is going to be. I have a strong feeling we're going to see a Candice LeRae, Rhea Ripley number one contenders match. Now, that's just me speculating, but I feel like those two are the top two if you're going to do a number one contender. And I think right now it's just Rhea's time. Candice has had a couple shots, and Candice does better as an underdog anyway. So if you're going to have somebody dethrone Shayna, Rhea could be a great person to, take that title off her and be the big bad. And even if you let Shayna keep it, and then I feel like that just feeds further into the Candice LeRae ongoing storyline of her underdog story trying to go for the championship against Shayna. So, that about wraps it up for this week. So, thanks for checking out the NXT podcast. Make sure you follow the No Holds Barred Network on Twitter at NHB Network. Make sure you check out the All Elite podcast at All Elite Pod. Check out AAW Pro Wrestling at AAW Pro. And check out Black Label Pro Wrestling based out of Crown Point, Indiana at B Label Pro. And make sure to follow me, your host, Skelly Bones, at Bones_Skelly. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys this Friday with my NXT report.